Millionaire divorces. His pregnant wife, unaware she's carrying 4 children, regrets it too late. Deep in the lush suburbs of Seattle, where sprawling mansions sit behind iron gates and high hedges, a scandal was brewing that no one saw coming. The story began with an affluent heir, Ethan Harrington, and his seemingly perfect marriage to Sophia Henderson. Their storybook union, though envied by many, hid cracks beneath its glossy surface. In a moment of impulsive betrayal and anger, Ethan chose to end it all, sending divorce papers Sophia's way without a second thought. Little did he know she carried his children, not just 1, but 4. And by the time he discovered the truth, regret would come far too late. Ethan Harrington was born into privilege. His father, Charles Harrington, had built an empire in the tech industry back in the early 2000s. The family's name became synonymous with innovation, and the Harringtons enjoyed an almost royal status in certain social circles. Their sprawling estate in Seattle boasted pristine lawns, a private tennis court, and a staff of over 20. From a young age, Ethan had everything he could ever want: designer clothes, the finest schools, exotic vacations. Yet, despite the abundant resources, there was a profound emptiness gnawing at his heart, a feeling that nothing in his life was truly earned. Sophia Henderson, on the other hand, came from humble beginnings. Raised by a single mother in a modest neighborhood of Tacoma, she learned the value of hard work early. While other kids spent their summers at the pool, Sophia worked part-time jobs to help her mum pay bills. Despite financial limitations, her determination and sharp mind earned her a scholarship to the same prestigious university Ethan attended. Their worlds collided one crisp autumn morning. Ethan was hanging out with some of his fraternity brothers, all equally privileged and self-assured, while Sophia was rushing to her part-time job at the campus library. She stumbled, dropping the towering stack of books in her arms. Pages fluttered across the sidewalk, and while many students just gawked, Ethan was the first to break away from his group to help. Their eyes met, and for a moment he was struck by something he'd never felt before: genuine concern for someone outside his social sphere. The spark was immediate. Conversation flowed naturally as they gathered the scattered textbooks. She thanked him, cheeks flushed, trying to conceal her embarrassment. He offered to carry the books for her, and she, normally so proud and independent, found herself saying yes. In that fleeting moment, the seeds of an extraordinary, if tumultuous, bond were planted. In the months that followed, Ethan and Sophia became inseparable. He introduced her to his lavish world of exclusive galas and penthouses, while she gave him a taste of sincerity and resilience. It was as if each completed what the other lacked. Their love, at the time, felt unstoppable. And so, with family expectations and societal pressures swirling around them, they decided to tie the knot shortly after graduation. A grand wedding that cost more than what some people earn in a lifetime. But behind the shimmering facade, small cracks began to form. Ethan, raised to always put business first, inherited a restlessness and hunger for success that sometimes overshadowed his personal relationships. Sophia, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile her moral compass with the opulence she was thrust into. She loved Ethan wholeheartedly, but she questioned how genuine his affections would remain once life's challenges truly tested them. Little did either know how massive that test would be when it finally arrived. Not long after their honeymoon in Bora Bora, an extravagant trip bankrolled by Ethan's father, life resumed. Sophia tried her best to fit into the role of a Harrington wife. She put aside her dream of pursuing a career in journalism to support her husband's ambitions. Ethan was busy forging his own path, determined not to just ride his father's coattails, but to create something bigger, bolder, and more innovative. The hours he spent at the office began to stretch well into the night. As the months turned into years, Sophia felt increasingly isolated. The Harrington estate was gorgeous, but it also felt like a gilded cage. The staff, led by the stoic head housekeeper, Miss S. Eliza Grant, adored Sophia for her kindness. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living someone else's life. Where was the love story she had been promised? Meanwhile, Ethan's star kept rising. He had an uncanny ability to charm investors and close deals. Before the age of 30, he secured venture capital to start Harrington Innovations, a tech startup aimed at revolutionizing medical equipment. His ambition and relentless drive were admired by colleagues like Mark Thompson, his lead engineer, and even overshadowed his father's accomplishments. Articles featuring Ethan's success popped up in Forbes and TechCrunch, fueling his ego further. But in the midst of this professional climb, Ethan grew more distant from Sophia. Their once intimate dinners were replaced by lonely evenings where she ate alone, reading the notes he left, telling her not to wait up. When he did come home, his mind was still at the office, scanning through financial projections, legal documents, or new patents. Though he never said it outright, Sophia sensed that in his eyes, her world of simple joys and emotional connections was trivial compared to the high stakes of big business. A confrontation was inevitable. One late night, when Ethan stumbled in after midnight, reeking of whiskey, Sophia was waiting in the living room, lights dimmed, her hands trembling with both anger and hurt. "You didn't even call," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes brimmed with tears. Ethan sighed and dropped his briefcase on the floor, loosening his tie. "I was with potential investors all night. You know how critical this round of funding is." "All night, Ethan. You couldn't spare 2 minutes to let me know you were safe." His face hardened. "I don't need a lecture. I'm building a future for both of us." Sophia looked down, swallowing her words. She had always been proud of Ethan's ambitions, but she couldn't help feeling neglected. "We never talk anymore," she said. "When was the last time we had dinner without your phone buzzing every 5 seconds?" He ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "Sophia, I'm trying to build an empire here. I can't slow down because you want me home by 6. That night, they slept in separate bedrooms for the first time. Over the weeks, that distance only grew more pronounced. Yet, in the darkest corners of her heart, Sophia clung to the hope that once the business stabilized, once Ethan proved himself to everyone, he would come back to her. She just had to hold on a little longer. Time marched on, and the cracks in their marriage widened. Adding to the tension was Ethan's new executive assistant, Hannah Wilson. Hannah was tall, elegant, and came from a well-connected family in New York. She was quick with spreadsheets and even quicker with witty banter, and she wasn't shy about flirting with her boss. Rumors began circulating within the office that the two were spending too much time together behind closed doors. Sophia, who'd always trusted Ethan, initially brushed off any gossip as typical workplace chatter. But when Ethan started coming home later than usual, his excuses sounding more contrived by the day, she couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Intuition told her something was amiss. One evening, as she prepared dinner, Ethan called to cancel at the last minute again. "I have to fly to San Francisco tonight for a meeting," he said over the phone. The hollowness in his voice betrayed him. "That's strange," Sophia replied, her heart pounding. "You didn't mention any trip earlier today. It came up suddenly." "I have to go," he insisted, then hung up. The next day, Sophia discovered from Mark Thompson, who felt deeply indebted to her kindness, that there was no San Francisco meeting on the schedule. Concerned, Mark advised her to take caution. He said he'd seen Hannah leave the building at the same time. Ethan did, toting an overnight bag. Enraged, Sophia confronted Ethan in his office the moment he returned. She found him behind his desk, Hannah standing too close, pouring him a glass of brandy. The sight was damning. "What is going on?" Sophia demanded, her voice trembling with indignation. Ethan stood, startled, nearly knocking the glass from Hannah's hand. Sophia, what are you doing here? I'm your wife. Do I need an appointment now? She spat, her eyes flicking from Hannah to Ethan. Hannah flushed. I'll give you two some privacy, she muttered, stepping out in haste. As the door closed behind her, Sophia glared at her husband. You lied about going to San Francisco. Mark told me there was no scheduled meeting. Ethan's voice was clipped. There was a change of plans. I couldn't talk about it. Couldn't or wouldn't. You've never cared so little about being honest. He exhaled loudly, frustration contorting his features. Sophia, I'm under immense pressure. Hannah is helping me close an important deal. That's all. He claimed nothing was happening, but his defensive tone and evasive answers only fueled her suspicions. She stormed out of the office, feeling betrayed and humiliated. Late that night, Ethan tried to talk to her at home, but he wasn't apologetic. He was furious she had shown up at work unannounced. Their exchange escalated into a shouting match, culminating in Ethan cruelly flinging words he would soon regret. If you can't handle being married to someone with real ambition, maybe we shouldn't be married at all. Sophia froze, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd never seen him so callous, his words cut like knives. In that moment, she realized something precious had died in their relationship, a mutual respect, trust, or maybe even love. Without another word, she turned away, walked upstairs, and slammed the bedroom door shut. The next morning she was gone before he woke up. Sophia spent the next few days at a modest hotel downtown, far from the luxurious estate that now felt suffocating. She was shattered, replaying Ethan's cruel words in her mind. Had their marriage been a facade all along? In the quiet loneliness of that hotel room, she finally allowed herself to face the possibility that they might truly be over. But life had a twist in store. On the second day at the hotel, Sophia woke up feeling nauseous. Initially, she attributed it to stress and heartbreak, but when the sickness persisted, a nagging thought seized her. She raced to a nearby pharmacy and purchased a pregnancy test. Then, hunched over the small hotel bathroom, she watched as the indicator clearly showed two bold lines, pregnant. A whirlwind of emotions engulfed her. Fear, joy, shock. How could she bring a child into a marriage that was disintegrating before her eyes? Still, the idea of carrying Ethan's baby awakened her maternal instincts. Despite everything, a part of her still loved him. She wanted to share the news, to give him a chance to rectify his mistakes. Yet, when she recalled the venom in his eyes, the disrespect in his voice, she hesitated. Would this baby be safer if Ethan remained in the dark? While weighing her options, she scheduled an appointment with a trusted OB-GYN. After a thorough exam, Dr. Rebecca Lawson smiled warmly and said, "Sophia, you're not just expecting one baby. You're carrying quadruplets." Her mouth fell open. Quadruplets? A surge of anxiety and exhilaration coursed through her. Never in her wildest dreams had she considered the possibility of multiple births. She thought of her mother, who had raised her alone. How would she manage 4 children without support? Over the next week, Sophia wrestled with her conscience. She realized that Ethan had every right to know about his children, but she also feared how he would react. Would he suspect she was using the pregnancy to trap him? Or worse, would he reject his own flesh and blood? Ultimately, she decided she had to tell him. But fate intervened before she could. A knock on her hotel room door interrupted her plan. A courier delivered an envelope divorce papers. Sophia's hands shook as she read the documents. Ethan was actually going through with it, discarding her like a useless asset, presumably so he could pursue his ambitions and possibly Hannah unencumbered. Tears blurred her vision. How could he do this without even talking to her? In that moment, her emotional state shifted from heartbreak to anger. She stuffed the divorce papers in her suitcase, not sure yet how to respond, but one thing became glaringly clear. She wasn't ready to reveal her pregnancy on his terms. She would protect her unborn children first, no matter the cost. Desperate and alone, Sophia dialed the only person she knew would understand the turmoil, her childhood friend, Julia Martinez. Julia had been her rock during their rough teenage years, always offering a listening ear and a place to stay when Sophia's home life became too overwhelming. Within an hour, Julia welcomed Sophia into her cozy apartment in Tacoma. The place was small, the furniture mismatched, but it felt more like home than the grand Harrington mansion ever had. "Soph, oh my God, come here," Julia said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I've been so worried ever since you stopped answering your phone." Sophia sobbed into her friend's shoulder, finally allowing herself to be vulnerable. Between gasps of tears, she recounted everything: Ethan's late nights, the suspected affair, the divorce papers, and the shocking discovery that she was expecting quadruplets. Julia's eyes widened. "Quadruplets? Are you kidding me? Girl, that's insane." Sophia sniffled, wiping her tears. "I know. And to top it off, he served me divorce papers as if I'm worthless." Julia guided Sophia to the couch and brewed her some calming herbal tea. "You need to see a lawyer ASAP. And as for the babies, you have to take care of yourself. No matter what happens with Ethan, these 4 little ones depend on you now." Sophia nodded, though anxiety threatened to paralyze her. She resolved to contact an attorney, one who specialized in family law and understood the nuances of dealing with high-profile clients. After making a few inquiries, she found a reputable lawyer named Cynthia Morales. Cynthia had a track record of successfully handling complicated divorce and custody cases involving wealthy individuals in the Pacific Northwest. At Julia's urging, Sophia set up an appointment. She also began looking for part-time work she could do without overstressing herself. After all, her savings were minimal compared to Ethan's fortune. She refused to grovel for hush money or child support, though she knew she was entitled to it. Her pride and protective instincts kicked in. Meanwhile, news of the pending divorce circulated through Seattle's elite circles like wildfire. Socialites who once welcomed Sophia at their tea parties now whispered behind her back. Hannah Wilson's name surfaced repeatedly, fueling rumors that she had won Ethan's affections. Sophia tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on her health and the looming legal battle. At her next prenatal checkup, Dr. Lawson emphasized the importance of rest, nutrition, and stress management, given the high-risk nature of a quadruple pregnancy. Sophia listened intently, albeit with an undercurrent of sadness. She wished Ethan could be there, rubbing her back and promising her that everything would be all right. But he wasn't. That version of him no longer seemed to exist. The day of her first meeting with Cynthia Morales felt surreal. As Sophia walked into the high-rise law firm, she felt painfully out of place among the polished marble floors and suits bustling about. Cynthia greeted her in a sleek conference room with panoramic views of the city, offering a reassuring smile. "You're making the right move by coming here," Cynthia said, gesturing for Sophia to take a seat. "Tell me everything, from the moment Ethan suggested divorce to the present." Sophia recounted her story, leaving no detail unspoken. When she mentioned the quadruplets, Cynthia's demeanor shifted from professional detachment to genuine concern. "Have you officially informed Ethan about the pregnancy?" she asked. Sophia shook her head, eyes downcast. "I planned to, but then the divorce papers arrived. I was angry, confused. I wanted to protect myself and the babies. I figured he didn't even want me, so why would he want them?" Cynthia leaned forward. "Sophia, legally, Ethan has parental rights, whether you inform him now or later. Hiding this for too long could be used against you in court, especially if we need child support or custody arrangements." A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek. "I know, but I'm scared. He was so cold." It felt like he'd do anything to get me out of his life. Cynthia handed her a tissue. I understand your fears, but we need to approach this strategically. The longer we wait, the more complicated it becomes. I suggest we file a response to his divorce petition and include your pregnancy in the legal documents. That way, there's a formal record that Ethan is the father. Reluctantly, Sophia nodded. She realized that although she wanted to shield herself from further pain, she had to take responsible steps, if not for herself, then for her unborn children. With Cynthia's guidance, she filed the necessary paperwork, an official declaration that she was pregnant with Ethan's children. As expected, the news spread like wildfire. The Harrington family attorney, William Cummings, immediately contacted Cynthia, demanding proof of paternity. The pressure was immense, but Cynthia stood her ground. We'll provide medical documentation at the appropriate time, she stated firmly. For now, rest assured that Miss Henderson has no reason to fabricate such a claim. She is, after all, still legally married to Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan received the bombshell news at his office. Hannah Wilson was standing beside him when he opened the legal notice. His face paled as he read the words, "Pregnant, quadruplets." Hannah noticed his sudden trembling. "Ethan, are you all right?" He dropped into his leather chair, running a shaky hand through his hair. "She's pregnant. And it's 4 babies." Hannah's eyes widened in shock. "Are you sure she's not just trying to—" Ethan cut her off with a glare. "Don't. Just don't." His mind spun, recalling fleeting moments with Sophia, the nights he'd ignored her. The cruel words. He'd been so certain he wanted a life free from emotional obligations, but now 4 unborn children changed the equation drastically. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt the sharp pang of regret. Ethan's immediate reaction was to demand a paternity test. His father, Charles Harrington, also got involved. The older man, while sympathetic, was primarily concerned about public perception and the potential impact on the family's business interests. "I'm not saying she's lying," Charles cautioned Ethan, "but we can't afford any scandals right now. Harrington Innovations is on the cusp of a major IPO. We have to manage this carefully." Ethan nodded, though he was still reeling. He wasn't entirely sure if Sophia would go to such lengths to deceive him. Part of him believed she wouldn't, but his pride and the swirling rumors about her wanting a piece of the Harrington fortune clouded his judgment. So Ethan's lawyer demanded a court-ordered paternity test. Cynthia Morales fought back, citing the health risks for Sophia in her current condition. The tension mounted. The media, hungry for any morsel of scandal involving the Harrington family, latched onto the story. Paparazzi staked out the law offices, the Harrington estate, and even the small apartment building where Julia lived, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sophia. Overnight, Sophia became a tabloid sensation, the scorned gold digger or the tragic heroine, depending on which gossip column you read. Back in her modest room in Julia's apartment, Sophia cradled her growing belly, anxiety gnawing at her. She'd tried to maintain her composure throughout this ordeal, but the constant harassment from reporters and the legal wrangling over paternity was draining. Julia did her best to protect her, installing thicker curtains and changing her phone number, but the stress remained intense. Ethan, meanwhile, found his once glamorous life turned upside down. Reporters followed him every time he left the office. Hannah Wilson, sensing the negative fallout, distanced herself. She still worked for Ethan, but kept her interactions strictly professional. Her earlier flirtations cooled by the harsh spotlight of scandal. Deep down, Ethan began to wonder if he'd been wrong about Sophia. Memories of their early love, of how she'd always stood by him, despite his long work hours and distant behavior, came flooding back. Why would she suddenly fabricate a pregnancy of quadruplets? It seemed far-fetched. Yet his pride wouldn't let him concede so easily. He was too invested in his narrative that Sophia had betrayed him, that she was the reason for his failing happiness. The first court hearing arrived, a preliminary session to discuss the divorce timeline and paternity testing. Sophia, visibly pregnant, sat beside Cynthia Morales, her eyes downcast to avoid the cameras flashing like lightning strikes behind the courtroom windows. Ethan arrived flanked by his father and William Cummings, a team of junior lawyers in tow. As the judge called the room to order, tension crackled in the air. William rose and insisted upon an immediate paternity test. Cynthia objected, citing the stress and risk to Sophia. "We're not opposed to establishing paternity," she clarified, "but the method and timing must be medically safe for a pregnancy of this complexity." The judge, balancing both sides, mandated a non-invasive prenatal paternity test, a simple blood draw from Sophia, and a cheek swab from Ethan to be conducted under the supervision of certified specialists. The hearing ended with no immediate resolution on the divorce terms, but the test was scheduled. As everyone filed out, Ethan risked a glance at Sophia. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. Her gaze was a mix of hurt and determination, and it sent a pang through his chest. He realized it was the first time he'd truly looked at her, really looked at her, since this entire ordeal began. She looked exhausted, thinner despite her rounded belly, and a wave of guilt crashed over him. But surrounded by his legal team and father, he brushed that feeling aside, letting his pride and facade of control remain firmly in place. Sophia dreaded the day of the paternity test, though she knew it was necessary to move forward. The test itself was quick, a simple blood draw from her arm, a cheek swab inside Ethan's mouth. The tension in the sterile medical office was palpable. They barely spoke, each flanked by their lawyers, the silence heavier than any argument. Once the samples were taken, the waiting game began. It could be up to a week before they received results, but both sides requested an expedited process given Sophia's pregnancy and Ethan's looming IPO. The media frenzy had only intensified, and every day felt like a slow, torturous march through chaos. Sophia tried to distract herself by focusing on her prenatal care. She researched everything about multiple pregnancies, from nutrition to the best birth centers. Julia helped her practice breathing exercises to combat the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. Cynthia Morales visited often to discuss legal strategy, but also to check on Sophia's emotional state. Meanwhile, Ethan threw himself deeper into work, though even that refuge was under strain. Investors were wary of the ongoing scandal, and board members worried about the effect on the company's public image. Late at night, when he was alone in his penthouse suite, Ethan found himself scrolling through old photos of him and Sophia, pictures of their college days, their wedding, their honeymoon. The memory of her laughter, her unwavering support, began to erode the fortress of resentment he'd built. After 5 days, the test results came in. Everyone reconvened in Cynthia Morales' office. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Sophia sat in a corner, hands folded protectively over her belly, while Ethan stood by the window, his posture tense. Cynthia broke the seal on the envelope, containing the official laboratory findings, scanned the page, and finally cleared her throat. She read aloud, "Probability of paternity for Ethan James Harrington in relation to the fetus, 99.999%. A hushed silence followed. The words floated in the air, momentous and irreversible. Ethan stared at Sophia, his eyes betraying a storm of emotion. Sophia felt an odd mix of relief and heartache. Cynthia continued, "This conclusively establishes Ethan Harrington as the biological father of the quadruplets." That single statement changed the trajectory of multiple lives. Charles Harrington, who was on a conference call, demanded immediate details. William Cummings asked to see the full report, verifying each line. Ethan said nothing, simply letting the enormity of the moment sink in. Finally, he turned to Sophia. "Why didn't you tell me before I served you those papers?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. I tried to, but you were too busy, or angry, or both. Then the papers came, and I didn't feel safe telling you. You made it clear you didn't want me. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words emerged. The weight of his decisions, his pride, suddenly felt crushing. Cynthia stepped in, guiding the conversation back to legal matters. They discussed options for custody, child support, and the path forward for the divorce. The room buzzed with legalese words like settlement, visitation, and prenatal obligations. But all Sophia could think about was that Ethan finally knew the truth, and it had come too late for them as a couple. Or so she believed. Upon learning the test results, Charles Harrington took immediate action to control the narrative. He hired a top-tier PR firm to spin the story. The official statement read, "The Harrington family is pleased to confirm that Ethan and Sophia are expecting children, and we look forward to their healthy arrival. We request privacy during this family matter." Behind the scenes, Charles was livid. He summoned Ethan to the family mansion for a stern talk. They met in Charles's ornate study, lined with leather-bound books that gave the space an air of gravity. Charles stood by the fireplace, glaring at his son. "Do you realize what you've done?" Charles snapped. "You've put this entire family and our business at risk. The press is having a field day." Ethan slumped in a leather chair, his shirt collar feeling uncomfortably tight. "I didn't know, Dad. Sophia never told me she was pregnant." Charles scoffed. "Well, you're responsible for those babies, whether you like it or not. And a scandal like this could derail the IPO. Our investors need assurance that there won't be more skeletons tumbling out of the closet." Ethan felt the sting of his father's words. He resented the implication that his children were a mere inconvenience. "They're my kids, not some business liability," he retorted. Charles's expression cooled. "So, you're ready to take responsibility, because I see two options. One, you reconcile with Sophia and present a united front. Two, you finalize this divorce amicably, ensure she's well compensated, and remain actively involved in your children's lives. But do not drag this family through a vicious court battle." The ultimatum hung in the air. Ethan realized he had no choice. Torn between a sense of guilt and a lingering shred of affection for Sophia, he excused himself and left, still uncertain about the right path. Shortly after the paternity test, Ethan made an unannounced visit to Julia's apartment. Armed with a bouquet of lilies, Sophia's favorite, he knocked on the door, heart hammering in his chest. Julia answered, eyeing him with open hostility. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "I just want to see Sophia," he replied, holding up the flowers as if they were a peace treaty. Julia let out a bitter laugh. "Ethan Harrington shows up after humiliating and abandoning my friend, and he thinks flowers will fix everything?" Ethan's face flushed. "I know I messed up. I just need a moment to talk to her." Julia considered it briefly, then relented. "Fine, but keep it short. She's under enough stress." Sophia stood in the living room, dressed in a simple, flowy dress that accommodated her growing belly. She looked fragile yet strong, her hands protectively cradling the life within. The moment she laid eyes on Ethan, her expression hardened. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice shaky. He stepped forward, offering the bouquet. "I needed to see you. I'm sorry, Sophia. I reacted badly, worse than badly. I was a jerk." She took a deep breath, tears welling up. "You served me divorce papers while I was pregnant with your children. Do you have any idea how that felt?" Ethan lowered his gaze. "I was blinded by anger, mistrust, and people whispering in my ear. I should have listened to you, but I didn't. I can't take back what I did, but I want to move forward. Let me be there for you and our babies." Sophia's heart twisted. She wanted so badly to believe him, but she remembered how he'd treated her. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Ethan. You hurt me so deeply. This isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about 4 little lives. He carefully reached out to place a hand on her belly, as if seeking permission. I want to help, financially and emotionally. I'd like to come to the doctor's appointments if you'll let me. I promise I'll do everything I can. Her tears spilled over. A part of her wanted to fling her arms around him, to find solace in the man she once loved. But the memory of betrayal loomed large. After a long, tense silence, she nodded stiffly. I won't keep you away from your children, but don't expect things to go back to how they were. Ethan's shoulders relaxed marginally. Thank you. I understand I have a lot of work to do to earn your trust, and I'm prepared to do it. Julia, who had been silently observing from the hallway, broke the tension. Soph, you all right? Sophia nodded, tears still clinging to her lashes. Yes, let's just take this one step at a time. Ethan left with a glimmer of hope in his heart. For the first time in months, he felt he had a purpose beyond board meetings and quarterly reports. As he got into his car, he vowed to prove himself to Sophia, not with grand gestures but through consistent, unwavering support. Whether it would be enough, only time would tell. Over the next several weeks, Ethan accompanied Sophia to her prenatal appointments. Dr. Lawson, initially skeptical about his change of heart, observed his behavior closely. To everyone's surprise, Ethan demonstrated genuine concern and attentiveness. He asked questions about fetal development, inquired about the dietary changes Sophia needed to make, and even researched bed rest protocols for high-risk pregnancies. Sophia, meanwhile, remained guarded. She appreciated Ethan's involvement but refused to move back into the Harrington estate or renounce the divorce. The emotional wounds were still too raw. However, as the pregnancy progressed, complications arose. During a routine ultrasound at around 20 weeks, Dr. Lawson noticed increased stress on Sophia's body due to carrying quadruplets. She recommended partial bed rest, warning that preterm labor was a real threat. That afternoon, as Sophia lay in bed at Julia's cramped apartment, her anxiety skyrocketed. How could she manage partial bed rest in a space so small, with paparazzi still occasionally lurking outside? Ethan arrived with a solution. He'd rented a fully furnished townhome in a secure, gated community, conveniently located near the hospital. It was smaller than the Harrington estate but had multiple bedrooms and all the amenities needed to keep Sophia comfortable. I'm not asking you to move back in with me, he clarified. I just want you and the babies to be safe. Sophia weighed her pride against her children's well-being. Reluctantly, she agreed, with the condition that Julia could stay with her. Ethan readily consented. The new living arrangement brought both relief and tension. Julia eyed Ethan warily, but even she had to admit he was making an effort. He hired a private nurse, Mary Thompson, to help monitor Sophia's vital signs, prepared healthy meals, and installed a home security system to ward off intrusive reporters. Despite these positive strides, the specter of divorce still loomed. Ethan's legal team and Cynthia Morales continued to negotiate behind the scenes, working out a potential settlement that included hefty child support and provisions for Sophia's healthcare. Cynthia pressed Sophia to consider finalizing the divorce sooner rather than later. You have the upper hand, she reasoned. Ethan's scared of bad publicity before the IPO. You can secure a very favorable arrangement. But Sophia hesitated. Something in her heart wouldn't let her rush into finalizing the paperwork. She told Cynthia, let's wait until after the babies are born. My focus is on their health right now. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan was beginning to have second thoughts about divorcing altogether. He saw her vulnerability and grace under pressure, traits that had originally drawn him to her. Yet, he didn't dare confess his desire for reconciliation, afraid of being rejected again or accused of manipulating the situation for the sake of public image. As Sophia settled into the routine of partial bed rest, Ethan found himself increasingly present at the townhouse. Though he kept a separate residence, his days revolved around ensuring her comfort, scheduling doctor visits, and managing the swirl of Harrington innovations from his laptop. Their interactions, while initially strained, began to thaw. Often, he'd find her reading about newborn care or crocheting tiny booties for the quadruplets. One afternoon, he cautiously approached her. "You need anything?" She glanced up, her expression softening slightly. "Could you help me get a glass of water?" "Of course," he replied, quickly fetching the water and placing it within her reach. She thanked him, a small but sincere smile crossing her face. They began having guarded conversations, mostly about the babies. Sophia spoke of her hopes and fears, how she worried about finances, about juggling 4 infants at once, about whether she would be a good mother. Ethan listened intently. One day, he even brought a parenting book he'd been reading, flipping to the section on managing multiples. Sophia raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You're reading about this?" He nodded, a tinge of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "I need to learn somehow. I've never even changed a diaper before." A tiny laugh escaped her lips. For that moment, they felt almost like partners preparing for a shared future, not adversaries in a legal battle. The moment was bittersweet, tinged with the knowledge that they were separated by layers of hurt. Meanwhile, Julia watched these changes with cautious optimism. She wanted Sophia to be happy, but she also worried that Ethan might revert to his old ways once the babies arrived or the business pressure eased. Still, she kept her opinions mostly to herself, supporting her friend through each pregnancy milestone. Just when things seemed to be calming down, an unexpected visitor disrupted the fragile peace. One morning, while Ethan was out running errands for Sophia, Hannah Wilson appeared at the townhouse. Julia opened the door and instantly recognized her. "What are you doing here?" she asked icily. "I need to speak to Sophia," Hannah said, stepping forward. Julia blocked her path. "I don't think she wants to see you." But Sophia had overheard the commotion from the living room. Her curiosity piqued. She instructed Julia to let Hannah in. The tension was thick as Hannah entered, her gaze flicking nervously around the space. She seemed different from the poised, confident assistant who had once stood so close to Ethan. "I'm not here to stir trouble," Hannah began, her voice subdued. "I came to apologize." Sophia, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, arched an eyebrow. "Apologize for what?" Hannah swallowed hard. "For everything. I admit I overstepped boundaries with Ethan. I convinced myself our late nights at the office meant something more, but I realize now it was a mistake, fueled by ambition and maybe a bit of jealousy. He never fully reciprocated my feelings, and I took advantage of the strains in your marriage." Julia snorted in disbelief. "You expect Sophia to just forgive you?" Hannah lowered her head. "No, I don't, but I needed to say this. I got another job offer in Boston, and I'm leaving Seattle. Before I go, I wanted to make things right. I'm truly sorry, Sophia. If I caused you pain or contributed to the breakdown of your marriage, I regret it deeply." Sophia studied Hannah's eyes, searching for deceit. Instead, she found genuine remorse. "I appreciate you coming here," she said quietly, "but this situation was bigger than just you. Ethan and I had problems long before you entered the picture." Hannah nodded. "Still, I wanted to clear the air. I wish you well with your pregnancy and everything else." And with that, Hannah departed. Julia locked the door behind her. Silence enveloped the living room until Sophia finally spoke. "Maybe it's good she's gone," she said, more to herself than to Julia. Julia frowned. "I still don't trust her intentions. But if it gives you closure, then fine." The encounter, while unsettling, brought a strange sense of resolution. Sophia realized that her marriage's collapse couldn't be laid solely at Hannah's feet. The cracks had been there all along, And now it was up to her and Ethan to decide if they wanted to rebuild or remain apart. As Sophia entered her third trimester, her belly enormous with 4 growing babies, complications arose. One evening, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness, followed by sharp abdominal pain. Alarmed, Julia called Ethan, who rushed over and insisted on taking Sophia to the hospital. Doctor Lawson examined her, noting early signs of preeclampsia, high blood pressure, swelling, and protein in the urine. Sophia, carrying quadruplets, puts a lot of stress on your body, she warned. We might need to consider an early delivery if your blood pressure doesn't stabilize. Fear and concern washed over Ethan and Sophia alike. The idea of 4 premature babies terrified her, and Ethan felt overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. In the hospital room, he held her hand, his eyes reflecting genuine worry. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked softly. She shook her head, tears glistening. "Just be here." For the next week, Sophia remained hospitalized, monitored around the clock. Ethan camped out in the waiting room, fielding business calls and ignoring the pleas of his father and William Cummings to attend urgent meetings. For once, he prioritized family over finances. Late one night, when Sophia was asleep, Dr. Lawson approached Ethan in the hallway. "She's stable for now," the doctor explained, "but if her condition worsens, we'll have to deliver the babies early. That could mean a lengthy NICU stay." Ethan ran a hand over his face. "I understand. Whatever is needed, do it. Spare no expense." In that moment, all the corporate deals, the IPO, and the family name felt trivial compared to the reality that Sophia and their children were in danger. He prayed silently, not sure whom or what he was praying to, but desperate for a miracle. Word of Sophia's hospitalization reached Charles Harrington, who finally recognized the gravity of the situation. With surprisingly little fanfare, he visited the hospital to check on his son and soon-to-be grandchildren. Though they had grown distant, father and son found common ground in their concern for Sophia. Charles sat beside Ethan in the stark hospital corridor, the older man's shoulders hunched. "How's she doing?" Ethan sighed heavily. "She's holding on. The doctors are trying to keep her blood pressure down. They want to get the babies as close to full term as possible." Charles nodded, his usual business-like demeanor softened. "I'm sorry it came to this. I might have pushed you too hard, made you feel like you had to choose success over family." Ethan rubbed his temples, fatigue evident. "I made my own choices, but I appreciate your concern." In an uncharacteristic gesture, Charles patted Ethan's shoulder. "Keep me updated, and let Sophia know we're here to support her." Later that night, Sophia awakened to find Ethan dozing in the chair beside her bed. She noticed the worry lines etched into his face, the dark circles under his eyes. Something inside her shifted. She saw him not as the cold, distant businessman, but as the young man who once helped her pick up scattered library books on a college campus. The man she'd married for better or worse. Gently, she reached out and placed her hand on his. He stirred, blinking. "Hey," she whispered. "Thank you for being here." He squeezed her hand, relief flooding his features. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." Despite the doctor's best efforts, Sophia's condition worsened at 32 weeks. Her blood pressure soared, and signs of fetal distress in one of the babies forced Dr. Lawson to schedule an emergency C-section. The operating room buzzed with urgency as a team of specialists prepared for the high-risk delivery. Ethan stood by Sophia's side, dressed in scrubs, mask and cap. He held her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Though fear and anticipation churned inside him, he tried to project calmness. Sophia winced, tears leaking from her eyes. "Are they going to be okay?" He bent closer. "Yes, they will. You will too." The surgery began, and within minutes, tiny cries filled the room, 4 of them, each distinct. The medical team worked swiftly, rushing each baby to separate neonatal stations. Doctors and nurses huddled around the newborns, checking vitals, suctioning airways, and stabilizing them in incubators. Sophia wept with relief and worry, barely able to see her children behind the throng of medical staff. Ethan kissed her forehead, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He felt an intense rush of protectiveness and awe. After a flurry of activity, Dr. Lawson announced the baby's weights, all hovering around the 3-pound mark, some smaller. They would need significant time in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, yet all signs pointed to them being fighters. Exhausted from the anesthesia and the emotional toll, Sophia slipped into a fitful sleep. Ethan watched as they wheeled his newborn children to the NICU, each encased in a small, transparent incubator. In that moment, he knew his life would never be the same. The days that followed were a blur of hospital corridors, NICU alarms, and whispered prayers. Each baby, who Sophia and Ethan named Ava, Noah, Lily, and Owen, faced their own set of challenges: underdeveloped lungs, difficulties feeding, and fluctuations in oxygen levels. Sophia herself remained in recovery, her blood pressure still precariously high. Ethan spent every waking hour shuttling between Sophia's room and the NICU, determined to support both mother and children. He learned how to handle preemie care with the help of the NICU nurses, gently placing his hand inside the incubators to offer skin-to-skin contact. Each tiny hand grasping his finger felt like a miracle. Julia visited often, her eyes shining with tears at the sight of the quadruplets. She helped Sophia with her postpartum struggles, from learning how to pump breast milk to coping with hormonal roller coasters. Even Charles Harrington made sporadic appearances, marveling at how fragile life could be, and offering discreet financial support to ensure the hospital provided every available resource. One evening, Sophia was finally well enough to be wheeled into the NICU to see her babies up close. Emotion overwhelmed her as she gently brushed her fingertips against Ava's cheek through the incubator's opening. Tears streaming down her face, she mouthed, "I love you," to each one. Ethan stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, tears in his own eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking, "for everything." She inhaled, tears still slipping from her lashes. "I just want us to be okay for them," he nodded, his heart twisting. "Me too." Weeks went by, and slowly but surely, each baby grew stronger. Sophia was eventually discharged, though the quadruplets remained in the NICU for specialized care. During this time, Ethan and Sophia found themselves in an odd limbo. They were neither reconciled nor fully separated. Their divorce proceedings were still pending, their relationship unclear. One day, Ethan approached Sophia with a sincere request. "I want you to come back to the Harrington estate." Seeing her apprehension, he quickly added, "Not permanently, and not on my father's terms. But the estate has a full medical wing we can equip for the babies once they're discharged. It's the safest place for them." Sophia hesitated. The thought of returning to that sprawling mansion brought back painful memories of isolation and neglect. Yet, the practical benefits for her fragile newborns were undeniable. She spoke to Dr. Lawson, who confirmed that a controlled, well-equipped environment would be invaluable for the babies once they left the hospital. After much soul-searching, she agreed, under the condition that she could bring Julia and maintain separate living quarters from Ethan. He consented without hesitation, determined to show his changed priorities. Moving back into the Harrington mansion felt surreal. The staff welcomed Sophia warmly, especially Miss S. Grant, who wept tears of joy upon seeing her return. Ethan oversaw the conversion of several rooms into a comfortable nursery, complete with specialized cribs, monitors, and even a small lounge for late-night feedings. Though they lived under the same roof, Sophia and Ethan walked a delicate line. Old habits threatened to resurface, Ethan working long hours, Sophia retreating into her shell, but the presence of the quadruplets forged a new bond. They attended infant CPR classes together, marveled at each milestone, and supported one another during the frequent NICU visits. Bit by bit, the ice between them melted. Late at night, Ethan would linger outside Sophia's suite, just to check if she needed anything. Sometimes they ended up talking for hours, sharing stories of their college days and the dreams they once had. A fragile hope began to bloom. Maybe they could find their way back to each other, not out of obligation, but genuine love. After nearly 2 months in the NICU, the day finally arrived for the quadruplets to come home. Doctors gave each baby a clean bill of health, though they emphasized the need for vigilant monitoring and frequent follow-ups. The Harrington mansion bustled with excitement as 4 tiny bassinets were rolled into the newly equipped nursery. Sophia fussed over every detail, from sterilizing bottles to arranging baby blankets. Ethan hovered nervously, anxious about the enormous responsibility now resting on their shoulders. Julia had taken a leave of absence from work to help, and a dedicated team of neonatal nurses joined them to assist with round-the-clock care. The first night was a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes and lullabies. Sophia and Ethan were awakened almost every hour by at least one baby crying. Yet, in this controlled chaos, they found a strange sense of unity. They were exhausted, yes, but also filled with a profound love for their children and an undeniable closeness to each other. In those quiet, sleep-deprived hours, when Sophia and Ethan sat side by side, cradling Noah or Lily, while Ava or Owen dozed in the bassinets, the distance between them seemed to evaporate. They laughed at the ridiculousness of feeding 4 babies in assembly line fashion. They comforted each other when the weight of parenting preemies felt overwhelming. It was a closeness they hadn't shared since their early marriage days. One particularly challenging night, all 4 babies decided to cry in unison. Julia was catching a few hours of much-needed sleep, and the nurses had gone to rest in the staff quarters. With the cacophony echoing off the nursery walls, Ethan and Sophia scrambled. "I'll take Noah and Lily," Ethan shouted over the din. Sophia, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep, picked up Ava and Owen, rocking them gently while humming an off-key lullaby. Slowly, one by one, the quadruplets settled down. Once calm was restored, Sophia and Ethan collapsed on the nursery couch, sharing a breathless, relieved laugh. Panting from the exertion, Ethan turned to Sophia, his eyes filled with admiration. "You're incredible. You know that?" She exhaled shakily. "So are you." Hesitating, she added, "I didn't think you had it in you to be such a hands-on father." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. "I didn't think I had it in me either." But these little ones changed everything. They locked eyes, and an electric current passed between them. Tired, emotional, and deeply grateful, Sophia leaned in. Their lips met in a tentative, lingering kiss, filled with all the sorrow, forgiveness, and hope they'd bottled up. For a moment, the world outside the nursery ceased to exist. That kiss marked a turning point. Slowly, the walls around Sophia's heart came down. She allowed Ethan to be there for her, not just as the father of their children, but as someone who had truly changed. The divorce papers, once the focal point of their struggles, now gathered dust in a drawer. They still argued at times about business obligations, about Ethan's father meddling in their affairs, about the stress of caring for 4 infants, but the difference was in how they resolved it. Instead of shutting down or lashing out, they listened, apologized, and found compromises. Therapy sessions, both individual and couples, helped them address the underlying issues that had derailed their marriage. Charles Harrington, seeing his son's renewed happiness, eventually softened. The IPO went forward without a hitch, with Ethan deciding to step back from the spotlight to focus on his family. Investors respected his decision, and the stock price soared, validating the strength of Harrington innovations even without Ethan's constant presence. Sophia, for her part, began contributing to a local parenting blog, sharing her journey of raising quadruplets. Her heartfelt posts resonated with thousands of readers who admired her honesty, resilience, and the rediscovery of love. One evening, Ethan surprised Sophia by taking her to the greenhouse on the mansion's grounds, a place she'd adored but had been neglected for years. Under twinkling fairy lights, he held her close. The soft fragrance of orchids and jasmine surrounded them. "I know we have a long road ahead," he murmured, "but there's no one else I'd rather walk it with." A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek, but it was a tear of joy. "I love you," she whispered. He bent his forehead against hers. "I love you too." In that tranquil moment, they felt the weight of their shared history and the promise of a bright, united future. Through betrayal, mistrust, and near catastrophe, they had rediscovered something more powerful than ambition, a love that transcended their individual faults, made stronger by 4 tiny miracles who now cooed and dreamed in the nursery they called home. Ethan and Sophia's journey proves that love can endure even the darkest storms, especially when the stakes are as high as bringing 4 new lives into the world. Their marriage was pushed to the brink by ambition, betrayal, and crippling misunderstandings. Yet a single life-altering twist, a hidden pregnancy, revealed how fragile and precious their bond truly was. Through heartbreak, legal battles, and medical crises, they rediscovered each other and built a family stronger than ever imagined. If this epic story of regret, redemption, and resilient love resonated with you, don't forget to like and share this video to spread the message. And be sure to subscribe for more captivating, real-life drama fiction that stirs the heart and soul. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind us love can triumph, even when hope seems lost. Thank you for watching.